which was the case, and in fact having Pakistan essentially trying to bring it down, and the United States, in a sense, passively siding with Pakistan, that actually does not help that central government in any way, shape, or form. And in this particular case, the government was not hugely competent, but it would be rather difficult to have. It's difficult to have a competent central government in a country like Afghanistan. It is what it is, and it's just the nature of the place. So essentially, it must have been very clear to everybody that the central government didn't have a friend in Washington any longer. And on the periphery of the country, what happened was the government had no tax returns to speak of, couldn't distribute the taxes, much money, and essentially the local officials, you could call them warlords, you could call them local potentates, basically were told, pay your own way. And that led to roadblocks, that led to all sorts of ways that the country essentially came to a crawl, because to go from Kandahar to Kabul might have taken you to 10 or 15 roadblocks and checkpoints where you had to pay in each case. And then the checkpoints led to corruption, led to crime, and basically it was a country that was no longer functioning. And that's where the Taliban entered in 1994. They came to power in 1996. My personal, and I don't claim to be an Afghan historical expert, but a lot of the experts say the Taliban were invented by the Pakistanis, subsidized by the Pakistanis, directed by the Pakistanis. My own feeling from everything I've seen is that that's not the case. That it was actually, it was a homegrown organization that had very good contacts with the Pakistanis. The Pakistanis took advantage of them, but it really had a head of steam because it was Afghan. It was actually an authentic Afghan from the villages of the south, near Kandahar. Very regressive in many ways, bringing in a form of Islam that could best be described as from the Middle Ages. But this is who the Taliban were. And in a situation of chaos, the Taliban looked very attractive to a lot of people, including to the Clinton administration. One of the biggest promoters of the Taliban in the very early days is the man who's now the president of Afghanistan. And I have a whole chapter actually on how Hamid Karzai, who's from that region near Kandahar, came to the American consul in Peshawar and said to him, Richard, this is Richard Smythe, Richard, you must come down to the south, you must meet these Taliban, they are the wave of the future in Afghanistan. And in fact, Karzai was their representative for the first 6 months in office to the UN. He never really took up the post, but he was the appointed person. Instead of Pakistani money that went in to support the Taliban, you wouldn't believe who actually provided one of the biggest sums of money that the Taliban had in the early days. It came from the government. It came from Ahmed Shah Massoud and Ravani. Why were they subsidizing the Taliban, who ultimately overthrew them? Well, because in Afghanistan, as I say, it's by the nature of the country, it's rather hard to conquer, and you're always seeking new alliances, making new alliances, changing partners. And in this case, the Taliban, in order to get to Kabul or move on their way, had to first encounter Hekmatyar's forces in several points of the country. And the Massoud people made a calculation that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, will subsidize them, will support them. So a lot of their support actually came from, and I've never seen this anywhere else before, but I got it from Massoud's successors themselves. So the Taliban, as I say, really began in 1994 in a serious way, and they swept the south. There just was no resistance. And as they moved toward Kabul, Massoud tried to put out, to use his forces to block them. The Pakistanis played an important role by helping to buy the allegiance of local warlords in places like Sarubi, which is right on the road to Kabul, and turned them around, and the Massoud people didn't have a hope. So what they did was they staged a retreat from Kabul. Now, a retreat in Afghanistan is really something to behold, a well-staged retreat. They left in the middle of the night. They took all their weapons with them. They didn't lose a soul. and they also didn't lose a weapon. So it was a vacuum. Kabul was empty, the Taliban marched in, and the Taliban, like the Americans in 2001, thought they had conquered Kabul, that it was just theirs, and that God had made this possible, and they were now lords of the realm, and power that they thought they had acquired went straight to their heads. Shortly before Massoud and company departed Kabul, Osama bin Laden arrived in eastern Afghanistan near Jalalabad. I won't go to his whole history because it's been very well reported by other people in the whole story of the rise of Al-Qaeda. I will say that Al-Qaeda is a very much a creation that was built around the resistance in the 1980s. It was because bin Laden himself, a Saudi volunteer in the fighting against the Russians, was subsidized from home, and he brought in a lot of other Saudis and a lot of other Arabs who fought and who knew Afghanistan because they were taking part in the conflict. And so they knew the people, they knew the culture, they knew how to take advantage of it. They knew the limits, and they certainly knew a hell of a lot more than we did, the Americans. Even though the Americans were playing this crucial role in supporting this force, the CIA actually had a very small station in Pakistan, and it basically turned over most of the Charlie Wilson money to the Pakistanis, the ISID, who had a better idea. So anyway, you basically have bin Laden coming in just before the Taliban came into power. And it was very interesting. They didn't really know who he was. He had not fought in the South. He had fought in the east of the country. And they were mostly from the South. So they sent out envoys to meet him, and he sent out envoys to meet them. And in his very first days there, he basically started issuing all sorts of announcements and warnings that he was basically going to take aim at the United States, Britain, and the West. I don't know that they saw these articles that were written, and mostly in the London Independent, because the Taliban actually were not very worldly. They certainly didn't believe in television. I don't think that international news media was something they really cared a lot about. I'm not sure they even knew quite what bin Laden was up to even at that early stage. But they did know that they were getting warnings from people like the United States. In their first 6 months in power, they came to power basically in September of 1996, that bin Laden was bad news, that the United States would like to recognize. We actually sent out an envoy at one point to the Taliban in the very first days. They come to power, I think it was like the end of September, and a guy named Lee Poldren was the number 3 person in the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad. He gets a call in the middle of the night. He's up in the northernmost part of, I think, near Gilgit in Pakistan. And he gets a call in the middle of the night and says, "Get yourself ready. We're going to send you to Kabul ASAP." And they did up talking points for him, and the talking points were, "Welcome to Kabul," to the Taliban. "We want to recognize you. We want to turn over the embassy in Washington to your control. We want to support you. We will have an envoy there." It was just sort of like an embrace. Now that was before they saw what actually happened in Kabul, which was that Najibullah, the former leader, was taken out of his UN compound by force, was killed, and was then came from